There's someone talking to me through my bathroom sink. I don't know what to do. Before I start, I think it's only fair for me to be honest. I'm no writer. When I came to the subreddit, I didn't plan on writing anything down. I was honestly just hoping that I would instead find some account similar to what's happening to me. Some very popular post filled with comments that could explain everything away as hallucination due to gas leakage or a weird, rare, and unconventional trauma response. That hope has been dwindling for the past 2 hours, and the more I scroll, the less I want to go back to my apartment. Not even to retrieve my things, but I'm getting ahead of myself. As I said, I'm no writer. This is probably the first thing I've written out of my own volition since high school, so I apologize if it reads as an incoherent mess of disconnected thoughts. Above that, I apologize for the length, but I need someone to read this and help me. I need things to make sense. When I think about it, I suppose I understand why it didn't worry me much at first. You see, since I was young, I remember having to constantly turn off the water when I was showering, just to make sure I wasn't being called by my mom. More than that, I remember that quite often, when I got lost in shower thoughts, I'd get that sudden sinking feeling in my stomach, that tight, nauseating not any kid from a failing marriage has. And for a very brief moment before I turned off the shower head, I swear I could always hear my parents in a yelling match. It's called audio pareidolia, if you're curious. It's not uncommon, nor is it a hallucination. It's just another one of those moments our brain chooses to try and find a pattern. Be it in running water, a humming fan, or airplane engines. It's not rocket science to figure that a kid who was constantly yelled at, and more often than not, had to be the peacemaker when screaming matches turned physical, would have his brain search for that same violent pattern in the white noise of water hitting time. Hell, at that time, I distinctively remembered the deafening silence after the shower head was turned off. Was never quite as reassuring. My 7-year-old self would simply assume something really, really bad had happened instead, which often lead to quick rinses of my hair and body before tying a towel to myself as best I could at that age, ready to investigate the silence drowned only by my own beating heart, loud and quick on my ear. All of that is to say that even if it had gotten better through the years as I grew up, especially when I finally got to move for college, it wasn't something that ever quite left my life. As I mentioned, it's not an uncommon phenomena, so it didn't bother me. Why would it? Time slowly started to erase my parents' voices and replace them with the babbling you'd hear at a party or the soft whispering from a television. The type of stuff that blended with the water, easily disregarded. My life found its structure through college, and for the first time I had that so-called safety net. I will spare you the details of it all, but life was good, I was happy. I got my degree and found a good, stable job working as a graphic designer. Buying my own place at 26 was supposed to be one of those big achievements you commemorate with your buddies at the pub. And at first, it was just that. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, cheap flat downtown NYC, but it was mine. In hindsight, it makes sense why it was sold to me for half its value. "We're not rich enough to buy cheap," was what my father used to say, and I think I understand it now. It happened 6 months in. Like it was just waiting for the moment I had settled, had opened the last box and assembled the last screw. If you were to ask me about hearing things in the shower during those 6 months, I don't think I could tell you any instance of it in detail. The voices weren't gone per se, they were just background noise. The agglomeration of sounds you'd hear coming from a crowd. I was washing my hair when I first noticed that sound had changed. My usual mindless thrumming died on my throat way before I consciously picked up on it. But the moment I did, I went very, very quiet. Focusing, for the first time in almost a decade, I felt nausea forming in the pit of my stomach, burning up my chest. It sounded like my mother. She wasn't angry, she wasn't yelling or arguing with my father, she was just faintly calling for me. Just my name again and again. Now, if you haven't picked up on it yet, I don't speak with my parents. I haven't since the moment I left for college, which was years ago. In all honesty, I think a part of my brain suppressed their entire existence to a point. Because before that moment, I don't think I would have been able to tell you if I still knew how my mother sounded like. But right then, it was clear as day. She was calling for me like she would when dinner was ready, almost entirely disinterested. If it wasn't for everything else that happened after that, I would probably feel too embarrassed to admit that I was instantly and undeniably shitting my metaphorical pants. I don't know exactly how to explain. It just sounded off. As if the fact of it being my mother's voice after so long wasn't strange enough, it just sounded so asterisk clear. Like she was standing just outside the bathroom door, speaking as loudly as she could while maintaining a soft, neutral tone, blank, emaciated face inches from the wood. The silence that followed after I turned the shower head off, cutting her mid-syllable, wasn't comfortable. It just was. Even without the context I have now, it surprises me how quick I was to dismiss the whole thing. At that moment, I was genuinely terrified I'd opened my door to a mock version of my mother, patiently waiting for me on the other side of the door. There was no one there, of course, and by the time I was figuring out what I was gonna eat for dinner, I had practically already scratched the whole thing as just odd. For me, it didn't matter that it sounded so clear, so distinct from anything I've ever heard before while showering. Monotonous, always with the same pitch. Like a recording on loop, very much unlike the usual noise my brain would craft out of running water. The more likely explanation, that it was simply an echo of a bad memory from a past that was long behind me and nothing beyond that, wasn't really up for debate then. It was just the sort of thing that you rationalize the more the time goes by. And to be fair, I wasn't proven wrong until almost 3 weeks later. The second time I heard something, it was early in the morning. I was showering to try and get rid of a bad hangover before work, not exactly my proudest moment. Just like the first time, there wasn't anything special about the occasion. I was rinsing soap off my back, lost in thought. There wasn't any transition between the noise of the water and the sudden screaming. As a child, whenever I had the feeling my parents were fighting, it always sounded like muffled yelling coming from behind the door and down the stairs. This was different. It was as if there was a woman in my bathroom, standing behind the shower curtain, screaming her lungs out. I don't even think I've ever heard that noise come from a human being before. Absolutely throat-shredding. The closest I've heard to that were mountain lions. It must have lasted for only a second or two, but it made me jump and slip on the tile, hitting my knee with a pretty loud wet smack on my way to the floor. I think I must have yelped too. I don't remember. I just remember that my hand shot to grab the curtain and pull it all the way open before I could even process the implications of that scream, making me face the empty bathroom naked, half kneeling on my quickly bruising knee, with the water still running and with my heart on my throat. She wasn't there. There was no one there, not even beyond the door I had subconsciously taken to leaving ajar since the last incident. I didn't feel watched, and there were no signs of anyone in the apartment besides me. I was hangover, yes, but I wasn't drunk. I wasn't high. My family has no history of anything such as schizophrenia or psychosis. I am genetically more likely to have clinical depression thanks to my mother, but that was far from being prone to hallucinations in my books. I couldn't focus that day. I left for work with my shirt put on backwards and still somehow managed to arrive late. The whole day was foggy. Once it was time to clock out, I didn't want to go back home, but the idea of arriving to my flat after dark was even worse to me. Some of you, at this point, probably think I'm a moron, but my place was just as it was when I left. If it wasn't for my still sore knee, I honestly probably would have tried to somehow write the whole thing off as residual fatigue from the day before. Even now it sounds stupid to say, but for as embarrassing as it felt, I took to showering on my gym's showers for the following week. I brushed my teeth at my office with a brand new toothbrush and generally found my way around using my bathroom. There wasn't even any particular deeper thought behind it, I don't think, just instinctual fear. Like it was easier to just leave that door locked and go through the hoops of doing all my other necessities elsewhere. It wasn't a maintainable lifestyle. I couldn't avoid my own bathroom forever, and as time healed my knee, it also made my actions look more and more absurd. The morning I woke up and cursed at myself for forgetting to shave back at my office the night before as a hand ran over my chin. That fact hit me all at once like a freight car. What the fuck am I doing? I remember my face went really hot, and if I hadn't been acting like a complete lunatic for the past week or so, I probably would have laughed at myself. I didn't. I think there's very few things in my life I regret more than I do going back into that bathroom to shave. The room was cold as always, but untouched. There was no foul smell, nor figure standing by the corner, nothing. It was just my bathroom. Still, the tension didn't leave me, and the fact I was still scared made me glare at my own reflection before I started to search for a razor. I've always preferred them over those electric ones. Maybe if it was the other way around, I could have lived in blissful ignorance for a few more days. But I think it was inevitable, and maybe it was better sooner than later. The plastic cap I usually leave on my razor overnight dropped on the drain and got stuck between the gaps, half of it sticking up diagonally. So my fingers instinctively reached for the plastic piece, prodding between the gaps, only to be welcomed to the slimy, cold walls of the drain, brushing uncomfortably against odd, hard bumps. The sensation was enough to make me pull away immediately in disgust, allowing the cap to slide further and out of view. I wasn't too worried. My sink is connected to a wooden cabinet, and the initial drain pipe is right there when you open it. It's honestly a great design, especially for people who often lose their jewelry to the sink. What did make my blood run cold, like the iron in it had been replaced with tiny ice cubs, was the noise the drain made. A few bubbles popped out between the gaps, bursting against the porcelain as the sink seemingly gurgled and choked. It only lasted a second. The cold from the tile floor managed to seep through my pajama into my legs as I knelt down in front of the sink. The air felt too thick on my throat. I swallowed hard, my heart thundering on my chest in the telltale signs of fight or flight. For some reason, despite myself, I still reached out to open that cabinet door. The woman inside was naked, but her whole figure was shrouded by her own thick, overgrown brown hair. Her body was painfully contorted and crumpled to an impossibly small frame, barely fitting her enclosure, but still shoved deep inside the cabinet. Her knees covered her chest, arms broken and bent to fit by her sides, the white bone poking out the dead flesh at her joints. I couldn't see her face. Her head was thrown back, face smushed against the cabinet ceiling. Her mouth would have been directly connected to the drain pipe in that position. No, it would. It was, as if on cue, her throat bobbed and a noise struggled out of her, pale body twitching with the effort. Her voice came through the drain in a sardonic whisper. "Found me." That voice still rings on my ears whenever it gets too quiet. I can't go back. Every time I remember my finger brushing against rotten teeth, I feel like I'm going to be ill. I've spent the past 2 days sleeping on a buddy's couch. I haven't even been able to pay for lunch or dinner because I have left quite literally everything back at my apartment, including my wallet. I can sense that his partner isn't quite as pleased to have me over for free and for an indefinite amount of time. I honestly can't blame him, but I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Nothing in my life has made me feel quite as small as she did, and I know that if I go back, she'll want to talk to me again. I don't want to go back. I don't think I'll go back,